My name is Mike Adams. I'm with Campus Safety and Security, and just as I alluded to, prior to coming to Auburn last year, I spent 25 years in the military. The last 17 years, I was doing maritime law enforcement and regulatory compliance for the Coast Guard. And this, because of that, and I was actually the chief of the Coast Guard Primary Training Center at one point, the training background sort of led to a pretty good fit working with the Clery compliance on the university. So say that as a segue into, this is a very cumbersome law to have to comply with. It can be very much so. Now, it's mainly for our staff. The reporting requirements are kind of tricky in some ways, but for you, the one takeaway I want you to take today is, if I could sum it up really into one sentence, is if you find out, if you learn about a crime that has occurred, to just report it to us. We're going to help you walk through any situation that you have. If there's a situation where you aren't sure if this is something that should be reportable, if you'll give us a call, we can walk you through it. We just want to make sure we get this right. We want to make sure and protect the university as well, because as you may be aware, there's been some large universities. There was one in the Northeast not too long ago. They received a very substantial penalty for failure to comply with the Clery Act, the requirements of the Clery Act. And as we're going to talk about before, there's some reporting requirements that have to take place, but actually from that really large significant fine that they received, only a small portion of that was actually for not reporting the initial crime. Much of the rest of that fine was due to incorrect categorization of the crimes that they had already reported. So we need to make sure we get this right. Just give you a real general understanding of the Clery Act, the purpose of it, to know what a CSA is, a Campus Security Authority, and what the responsibilities of a CSA are, and then to know how to make a CSA report. Kind of simple, huh? So the full name of the act is Jeanne Clery Disclosure of Campus Security Policy and Campus Crime Statistics Act. There is a policy aspect. It's not just reporting, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what that policy is. It is enforced by the Department of Education. And Jeanne's story, so I'm sure if you've had this before, you've heard the story, but it always bears repeating, is that Jeanne Clery was a freshman in 1986, and she actually, the story is that she actually desired to go to another university, actually in the Southeastern Conference, but it was a really long way from home. Her parents were very concerned about that, and so they decided that she would go to school much closer in what they thought was going to be a very safe and secure location. So in the spring of her freshman year, one evening her roommate decided that she was going to go out, and she asked Jeanne if it would be okay if she left the door to her residence hall room open so that she wouldn't have to worry about taking her purse and her keys, and wouldn't have to worry about waking Jeanne up when she returned. And unbeknownst to them, at that same time, there was another student on campus, a young man who was having issues of his own. Was very disturbed, and that evening he was walking through campus. He noticed that the emergency exit to Jeanne's residence hall was actually propped open by a pizza box. He was able to gain entry to that residence hall, what was supposed to be a very safe place for students. And he proceeded to go down the first floor. He checked room by room by room. The doors were locked. He went to the second floor through the stairwell, went down the same thing, door by door. They were all locked. He got to the third floor. When he got to the first door, on the third floor, it was Jeanne's room. It was opened. He went in, and he proceeded to brutally sodomize, rape, torture, and kill Jeanne Clery. As you might imagine, it's very difficult to lose a daughter. And so her parents wanted to know why, what happened. And so in the ensuing investigation, one of the things that they actually learned is that, not that it would have made a difference in what happened to Jeanne, but they did learn that there was actually a known crime problem, but there was really no way at that point for a school to be able to tell the potential consumer what kinds of crimes are occurring on their campus. And so that's one of the things that happened through this act, this law, was to provide a way for current and prospective students and employees to find out the types of information or the types of crimes that are going on campus. Also to find out what does the school have in way of policy. How are they going to deal with these things? What kind of safety precautions and measures are already set up that will help keep my student or myself safe when we're there. It also sets emergency notifications and procedures in place. It also covers fire safety and fire statistics, and then it also tells the potential consumer what type of education programs we have in place to help people keep themselves safe. We have the RAD program here, if you're not familiar with that, through Campus Safety and Security, where we teach young women how it's a self-defense class. It tells people that are interested in university what we have in place to be able to make them feel safe on campus and be safe. And it also tells people what our process, if we do have something that occurs on campus, it outlines the procedures that we have in place. How are we going to adjudicate things that happen on campus? Is it going to be an open process? Is it going to be a closed process? It lays out so that they know up front if something happens, this is how the university is going to deal with that. So there's 3 criteria for something to be Clery reportable. First of all, it has to be a Clery crime. It has to happen on Clery geography, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And it has to be reported to a CSA, which if you're here, that's you. The Clery Act deals with where, with the geography, as opposed to Title IX, which many of you are hopefully familiar with to some degree, that deals with the who, the person. So Title IX, if you're affiliated with a university and you're a victim of sexual assault under Title IX, it doesn't matter where that occurs, it has to be reported. On the other side, with Clery, it doesn't really matter if you have an affiliation with the university at all. If a crime occurs on campus, it has to be reported no matter who that is. So that's one of the big distinguishers between the two. So as a CSA, your responsibility is really just to report crimes. And we're going to take those crimes and include them in our crime statistics that we publish annually in the annual security report, or what we call the ASR. That's due 1 October of each year. But also there's a crime log, so that if you go to our site, you can find our crime log. And so every crime, even if it's not a Clery crime, has to be reported on that crime log within 48 hours of when it's reported to us. So that'll give you a snapshot of the types of things that are going on. Now it says it includes a CSA as anyone with responsibilities for students or campus activities. So hopefully that kind of gives you an idea. If you're an advisor to a student organization, actually the Department of Education specifically lists you as one person that would meet that criteria. What we do is we go to each school or each unit within the university, and we give them, that leadership, a list of the criteria, and we say, would you please provide us a list of all the people that you have that meet this criteria. So your responsibility is basically just to notify us of anything that happens, any of these crimes we're going to talk about. Now, it says that happen on Auburn property, which we're all pretty familiar with what is considered the core campus, that which is east of Shug Jordan, that's south of West Magnolia, that's west of South College Street. That's pretty easily defined. The other piece of this, though, and this is where it starts to get a little tricky, and let me say up front, please don't, I'm not asking anyone to memorize all these definitions, but I do want to make you aware of them, so that if you do, hopefully you don't ever have to, but if you do file a report, if I call back, or someone from Campus Safety calls back and says, could you give me a little bit more information about exactly where this occurred, you'll know why we're asking. Because it's very specific, the criteria that we're given and how we have to categorize these reports. And so believe it or not, if we say something happened in a residence hall, but the investigation actually turns out that it happened on the steps of the residence hall, if we're audited, that's actually a $54,000 fine for miscategorization by the Department of Education. It's that the geography is what Auburn owns, but also what we say we control. So, and I always like to ask this question, who in here that's been at Auburn for a while ever bowled at the Auburn University bowling alley? No one in this class. That's really, because everyone's aware we do offer a bowling class, correct, at the university, if you've looked. So actually what happens, the Auburn University bowling alley is on Opelika Road at the AMF. So you say, well, that's not Auburn owned, but during that time of whenever that class is offered, Monday and Wednesday from 12 to 1, if we have that lease agreement with that bowling alley to use it for a class, then actually becomes part of our geography during that time. So if a crime occurs in the parking lot while we're having a bowling class, that's reportable. So that's what, one of the big things they talk about, owned or controlled, is any type of relationship when we go study, when we travel abroad, you know, anything that we lease, that we have an agreement to use that period of time while it's being used, becomes reportable geography. It's really critical, this piece right here, I'm probably going to mention at least 2 more times about protecting the confidentiality of victims, especially of sexual assault. We want to be very, very, very clear. We do not want to keep those names. And I'll talk about, there is an instance where we may call you to ask a name on the phone, but we don't want those things in writing. We don't want that to become requestable under a Freedom of Information request, so that we end up betraying the confidence of someone who maybe came to us in confidentiality because we chose to keep those names. The reason we will, I'll go ahead and say it now, unfortunately sometimes if there's a big event going on, we may actually receive multiple reports of a sexual assault. And so in those cases, we need to make sure that we can differentiate between what reports were for the same incidents and what ones might be from something else. And so in that case, we may call, if you submit a report, and say, could you tell us the initials, can you tell us the name of that person, just so that we can make sure that we have the reports with categorized as they should be. We're not double counting or we're not undercounting those statistics. And finally, it's never your job to investigate. And in fact, campus security and safety, we don't investigate anything. We receive reports. The police, Title IX, they do investigations. We don't investigate. We receive reports. We do receive the reports from the police department on a daily basis. That's actually how things get onto our crime log, because they give us those reports on a daily basis. We have to look through those. We don't typically put down auto accidents, those kind of things we sort of filter out. But pretty much every other crime that's committed on our geography is going to be on that crime log. But I do want to mention this too. It's not your job also to determine the validity of a report, because you may have had this happen. If you haven't, you probably will sometime in the future. You may have a student that you know that's in your organization that maybe likes to embellish things a little bit, or maybe they like to embellish things a lot. And maybe you're not quite sure that they told you that, you know, they actually had an opportunity to ride in the blimp when it was over, you know, at the last football game, and got to, you know, those kinds of things. Well, if you have that person and then they come to you with a wild story maybe of a sexual assault that they witnessed, it's not up to you to, we don't expect you to say, you know what, I'm not sure I trust this guy. I think that's kind of wild, I'm not going to report it. Please report it. Please let us know. And when you file that report, it's absolutely okay for you to tell us, hey, look, this is what I heard. Here's some background on this maybe, of maybe why you have some doubts. But please report. We need that report, okay? All right, so once you are identified and in whatever mechanism as a CSA, you're going to be on the listserv, but you're going to be added to the email list, and once a year we're required to come to our list of CSAs and ask if you've received any reports. And it's also really critical when you receive a report to make sure that you get it, you let us know about it immediately, so that we can make an assessment of whether or not we need to send out a timely warning. We don't consider people with faculty with no responsibility outside the classroom to be CSAs. All right, so just a quick assessment to make sure everyone's tracking. A Spanish professor that teaches 3 classes per week and has regular office hours, are they considered a CSA? No, alrighty. So you got the same person, same workload, but now they lead the study abroad trip to Ecuador. Yes, they are. Okay, you have someone that's an academic advisor. That's their role. For Auburn University, if that's your sole contact with students, then that's considered more of a purely academic role, and you're not going to be considered CSA. So, a student organization advisor. We pretty well already covered this one. How about an athletic department administrative assistant? How about the person if you've ever been to the athletics department, you first go into the offices there. There's a desk, and there's someone that sits back there that may help you. Is that person? They're sure dealing with a lot of students every day, right? Well, the answer in this case is no. And here's the thought process behind that is that even though they're dealing with, who knows, hundreds maybe of faculty, staff, students, visitors every day, the thought is they're not developing a relationship with those people. So maybe they are, maybe they're not, but if that quick amount of contact, in fact, Department of Education actually specifically says people in a purely administrative capacity, that maybe like in a student accounts, where maybe there's students coming to them a lot, but they really don't have any other contact with students outside that, hey, why do I have to pay this bill? They're not being considered as CSAs either. How about an athletic department trainer? Absolutely. If you have a student, say a student athlete that has an injury, they have a torn meniscus or something, they have an operation, they've got 3-6 months of rehabilitation, that maybe they're developing a relationship as they go to that trainer 2-3 times a week over a several month period, that they might develop that type of relationship where they might hear that, hey, I need to tell you something, you've become someone I trust, this terrible thing happened to me, so that they've now are brought under this. What must be reported? Criminal offenses. We're going to talk about exactly what those are. Hate crimes, arrest and referrals for disciplinary action. Most of you are not going to be involved with that unless you're in student conduct or residence life. The VAWA crimes that occur on our geography. And so this is the first place we're going to talk about. On campus, there's public property, and there's owned or controlled by a student organization. There's actually a subcategory we'll talk about on campus is on-campus student housing. So the criminal offenses, as you might imagine, are homicide, murder, manslaughter. There's the sexual assaults, robbery, aggravated assault, burglary, motor vehicle theft, and arson. All right, so the hate crimes, any of the crimes that we just saw, plus incidents of theft, simple assault, intimidation, or any type of vandalism can be considered a hate crime if it's based, if the reason that occurred is based on a bias of any of these 8 categories. All right, so typically I'll let you know that the police department doesn't classify things as hate crimes very often. So if we receive a report that we have, there's something that leads us to believe that this could have been motivated by bias. There's actually a group on campus called the BERT team, the Bias Education and Response Team. And we'll convene that group, and they will work together, review all the information we have, and make a determination of whether that occurred. So if you see our annual security report that I was telling you about, if you look through there and you see any incidents of any hate crimes that are reported, it's likely that the evaluation was made by the BERT. So arrest and referrals from disciplinary action, we're going to spend much time here other than just to say a lot of these things, just to give you an example of how this happens. Say for the liquor law violations, a lot of students like to go to football games in the fall, sit in the student section. It's amazing how ingenious students can be in sneaking alcohol into the games. It's also very equally amazing at how good the police department is at finding those folks. And so when they do, that turns into a referral to student conduct, because you're not allowed to have alcohol in the stadium. So most of you aren't going to be dealing with that situation. I'm going to spend a lot of time on it. I will just say quickly, weapons, any arrests or referrals for weapons. Actually, you should be aware that there are slingshots, air rifles, the BB guns, paintball guns, those kind of things are considered weapons and are not allowed on campus. A bow, even if you have no arrows, is considered a weapon. So as you meet with students and other people, it's a nice thing to know so that you can educate them on that. So the VAWA offenses, one significant thing I'll mention here is the VAWA offenses don't only involve sexual assault. There's also dating and domestic violence and stalking. So the key here is if someone is a victim of a sexual assault, then there's information that we need to provide to them. Title IX has that information. We have that information, but the big thing the 2 points I want to make sure you're aware of here is we have resources that we need to get to them. We're not only required to, but we need to get them these resources so that they can better cope with what's just happened as a survivor of a sexual assault. And the other part of that is, again, confidentiality is critical. When you make a report to us, if you receive a report, please don't, we're not interested in knowing any personally identifiable information that's associated with that, but we do need to know that it happened. So stalking, I'm going to talk just a second about this. The way the Department of Education has defined this any unwanted attention or actions toward a person that happens really more than one time. A course of conduct, like they say, 2 acts or more, that will constitute a course of conduct. It's anything that happens that a reasonable person would fear for their safety or the safety of others. So one of the things, and I know up front that I'm giving you one of my examples I'm going to give of the questions I'm going to give you here in a second, but I'll go ahead and use that, is that what often happens, we see this with some regularity. Say you have a couple of students, they're high school sweethearts, they date and all. One decides to come to Auburn, one decides to go somewhere else, stay on, whatever. And once the student comes to Auburn and they see this great new world that they're in, and they decide they're not really satisfied with that relationship that they have anymore, and so they inform the person back home that they're going to explore new horizons, and the person back home is not really satisfied with that. So what do? They're going to start calling, texting, and it may be if it rises to the point where the person starts to feel uncomfortable about that situation, about the contact. If that person starts showing up on campus at their residence hall or at their apartment and starts making them fearful, they may file a report. Even if there's 99 contacts that occur off campus, in this scenario I'm giving you, it only takes one of those to occur on campus before it becomes something that's reportable under Clery. So just to make you aware of that. We also just want you to know too, if someone goes to the police department and says, hey look, I'm feeling uncomfortable, I have an ex-person that was significant to me at one time, and they're contacting me, I don't like it, I want to make a report, we're going to consider that if they are bothered enough to go and make a police report, that they are fearing for their safety or the safety of someone else, unless they specifically tell that officer when they're making the report, hey look, I just want to document this, I'm not concerned about this person hurting me or anyone that wouldn't hurt a fly, but I just want to make this report for documentation purposes. Unless they give that, we're going to count that as stalking. A little more assessment here. Would you report student receiving ongoing harassing messages in residence hall from former boyfriend? Would that be reportable? It is. Why? Because it's unwanted, they're harassing, it's happened, it's plural, so it's happening more than once, and it's at residence hall, it's happening on our geography, so it would be reportable. But then a student receives unwanted date invitation from another student while walking through the student center. It's not, because there's no course of conduct. It happened once, okay? Student says roommate was sexually assaulted, but it happened last semester. Yes, there's no statute of limitations with Clery reporting. If it happened 20 years ago, we still have to report it if we become aware of that. Student thinks someone put a drug in their drink at a Greek party. Is that reportable? It absolutely is. I'll tell you why. Well, and the assumption here is that the Greek party is happening at a residence hall that they own or control, or at maybe even the Holiday Inn ballroom. If they're leasing that becomes Auburn controlled property. And the other piece of this one is, if you're not familiar with Alabama law, if you give someone a drug without their knowledge, that's actually considered aggravated assault, which is one of the primary crimes here under Clery. Okay, so this is my favorite part, geography. The geography does consist of on-campus, like I told you about, on-campus student housing, public property, and non-campus, that which is owned or controlled by Auburn University or a recognized student organization. So I'm going to tell you here that the one thing that I mentioned briefly is before, the on-campus student housing. If you do receive a report from someone that says that they were assaulted somehow in their residence hall, it's really critical. Did it happen on the steps in front of your residence hall, or did it happen inside? Did it happen in the lobby? Did it happen on the stairwell? Was it inside the closed doors, or was it outside? It's really critical for us to know. So here's actually an example, if you're familiar with this. This area right here, that's the hotel, the Auburn University Hotel. This is Cambridge Hall, a residence hall, if you're not familiar. There's Gay Street, Thatch is at the top. This is South College. You notice it covers from sidewalk here all the way across the street to the edge of the sidewalk. So if something happens in the parking lot here, outside the hotel, we own that whole piece of property. That's going to be on campus. If it happens inside here, it's still on campus inside the hotel. But once it gets here, if it happens inside the doors of Cambridge Hall, then it's going to be on campus student housing. Then if it happens in any of these areas in the green, it's going to be on our public property. Final part of the student arrested for minor in possession of alcohol while at home in Atlanta during spring break. Is that going to be reportable? No, we don't own anything, as far as I'm aware, in Atlanta. Student has wallet stolen while bicycling at Chihuahua State Park. No. Is there a situation where that could be, though? If we went to Chihuahua and we had some type of agreement to have exclusive use of an area within Chihuahua, and that occurred, then it would be reportable. So, student falls, hits their head, requiring stitches during an argument in the lobby of a residence hall. For this example, it is, and I'll tell you what the rationale behind this is. They're in our geography, it's a residence hall. Is there a crime? If I'm a big guy, say, and I've got a buddy of mine that's much smaller than me, and say we've been playing, I don't know, racquetball, and we'd had a disagreement, there was a shot that was, you called it, it was, the ball hit the ground. No, it hadn't. We're in an argument. We're arguing all the way back to our residence hall, and so we get in the residence hall, and I'm just miffed at this buddy, and I say, if you tell me one more time how bad you beat me, I'm going to just smack your brains in, and he does, and so then I go to, I'm making the threatening move. And he's backing up and he trips over a coffee table and falls and bashes his head. Do I have to actually hit him to have assaulted him? It's a judgment call. I'm not saying it, but just making you aware that sometimes things aren't as easily delineated as you might think. And so in those kind of situations, that's something we're going to let the police determine. But I bring that up just so that you know that sometimes it's good for us to have that conversation. If you have something you're not quite sure of, let's talk through it. Student relates she was beaten by a boyfriend at a student org formal in Montgomery. Yeah, the insinuation here is that the student org group has leased the hotel ballroom or wherever it's being held, and any of the common areas associated with that. For reporting, include all reports of crimes, even if they're attempted and not completed. Even if someone comes to you and says, you know what, someone jumped out of the bushes and tried to grab me, but I was able to get myself away, and you think, well, was that a crime to grab someone? I don't know. Let us know. Even if it was by a third party as well. It doesn't have to be the victim. If someone tells you, hey, my roommate, something happened to them, it's the same thing. We have to report it. Any sexual assaults or violent offenses, again, survivors' names do not have to be reported. but we may call if we need to make a distinguishing between 2 or more reports. We may call and ask for that name. Drugging allegations, again, giving someone a drug without their consent is aggravated assault. And the CSAs must report crimes. It's very critical. Survivors, we're going to encourage them to report, but they don't have to. You need to report this to campus safety and security. If you report to us, you've met the obligations under Clery, whether or not it's reported to police or not. Reporting should be immediate. Tell victims of sexual assault that there are resources available, that we need to get to them. And it said, you may need to report to campus safety, security, and Title IX. If you call one, if you call me and tell me about a sexual assault that occurred, I'm going to tell you, you also need to reach out to Title IX. We don't work together, but we do work together. we will help you get to know what you need to report to them. And then hopefully they're doing the same thing for us. Okay, so the last slide here. This is what CSA report looks like. I just show it to you so you can get an idea of what kind of information has to be reported. If something happens and it's not convenient for you to get online and fill this thing out, just call us. I'll fill it out for you. Somebody else will fill it out for you. You can send us an email. As long as it has all the information that we need, I can just turn that thing into a PDF, and there's your CSA report. So we want to make things as easy for you. And really the thing is, we are here to serve you. So if you have a question, call. Let's talk through it and make a determination of whether or not it may be that you don't need to file a CSA report, but let's talk through it. And that's the whole takeaway. If something happens, let us know, and we'll figure out whether or not it's something that's reportable.